It always happens that when you have these many presentations and this very complicated setup, that you have a lot of, well, you have some technical difficulties, you know, something is not working. For example, this one was one of those peculiar issues of, you know, making the PowerPoint presentation on a Mac and then rendering it on a Windows machine on a big screen, so some pictures were not rendered correctly. But overall, I'm hugely impressed, and I would really want to thank you to the technical team, because it ran sort of as smooth as possible with this complicated setup. So thank you a lot. Today, this is the last day. To me, it's kind of unbelievable. It ran very fast. We will today mostly sort of summarize what we were talking about for the rest of the week. There's going to be maybe some new ideas, new thoughts, but we are going to be mostly sort of looking forward. Until now, we were, you know, trying to learn some new skills, and hopefully tutorials helped as well to kind of get your hands on, and hopefully you now have at your disposal some material you can work with and some codes you can adapt, potentially apply them on your own data in the ways which we can't probably even imagine, in the new ways and new cool ways. But today we are going to be mostly kind of, you know, recapitulating and as I said, sort of looking forward to see what can be done, you know, tomorrow. And of course, remember, on Monday we started talking about, our point on Monday was that we talk about speech. All this time, through the week, we were talking about speech recordings. Ideally, for some of us, machine learning minded people, raw recordings, just waveforms, you know, appropriately sort of with appropriate metadata, so that we know what those recordings are, but minimal processing by hand, you know. Because a few times I use the phrase that this is a type of work for kind of lazy phoneticians who don't want to be annotating, don't want to be doing some sort of very deep informed analysis. And it's not only about laziness, it's about trying to sort of remove all possible theoretical biases from our analysis. Of course, it's not always fully, or it's never fully achievable, but, you know, for example, we have to label the files by the language. You know? Language already is a theoretical construct, or even by a dialect. That's also a theoretical construct. You know, like if we have to decide on what dialect we label. So, you know, like I come from a relatively small town, but I lived in Dublin for many years, over a decade, and Dublin, like many other places on the British Isles, has very complicated sort of dialect structure itself. There are at least 4 discernible dialects, because there is sort of, even within the city, there is sort of geographical distinction, North Dublin and South Dublin, which, you know, is based on some particular historical sort of division of the town, nothing to do with the division of Ireland, much longer, 500 years ago. And then they have the sort of socioeconomic dialects as well, the sort of middle class dialect and working class dialect. And these two things interact. So if we want to do some analysis, for example, which would be another super interesting thing for me in particular, you know, of the Hibernian Irish English, put the label that somebody is from Dublin is a huge underspecification, you know. So all of these type of things are theoretically decided. They are decided in advance. What type of data we collect, how much information, and all that. But nevertheless, this is sort of still working with as little theoretical assumptions as possible. Now, if you want to study tones, for example, then you have to, in some language, and you of course want to sort of annotate them and label and figure out where the tones are, you always have to make the theoretical assumption that there are tones, and that the syllable is a carrier of the tones, or the vowel is a carrier of the tones. And when I label something as a tone, like T1 or something like that, then I have to decide what type of other information I include there. What type of information I include in the label. So do I say that this is a T1, tone 1, following tone 2? as opposed to tone 1 following tone 3? Or do I ignore this type of information? Do I say that is a tone 1 at the end of the phrase as opposed to tone 1 at the beginning of the phrase? Or do I decide to ignore this type of effect? So again, this is a theoretical assumption we have to make when we are analyzing any type of data. And we do it routinely. There is nothing wrong about that in principle, you know. We always have to make theoretical assumptions, but it's good to be aware of them. And this type of analyzing sort of raw data, it's, you know, requires fewer theoretical assumptions than the others. So it's a little bit sort of more theory independent type of inquiry than the others. So we are trying to minimize the theoretical load, almost starting from scratch, you know, almost starting, you know, as I said, like this again another metaphor, almost started looking at the languages in the world from the eyes of the Martian who just landed on the planet, crash landed somewhere and starts trying to make sense of these strange species which are everywhere, as opposed to many other much more interesting species which are much more rare. So that was the first day essentially. We kind of talked, we tried to kind of, you know, move your attention to speech. And then on the second day we talked about, you know, how to get our hands on some sort of speech sample. We talked about databases and how databases are organized and all of type of things. And you know, I hope that we have learned a little bit, even throughout our own preparation of the database, what are the steps. You have to have the meta file, what type of information you log there, what type of information you store, what type of information you try not to store, what type of information you store securely, what type of things you can share, all of these super important aspects. Then we talked about sort of machine learning. Two disguises we talk about in more. One which is more machine learning descended from statistical analysis, like many sort of classifiers, for example, which is a machine learning which has a relatively machine learning type, which are relatively strict algorithms, which are fit to some sort of database. And then on Thursday we talked about the other type of machine learning, which is a little bit more flexible. It's a machine learning where, you know, you train, well, flexible only in the sense that the networks behind it are way more complicated. So the mathematical functions which you fit are maybe better at fitting, but more difficult to actually know, to sort of reverse engineer, you know. While when you build a LDA classifier, LDA classifier, QDA classifier, you know very well how the algorithm works. It's an algorithm with relatively few parameters, so you know what your results really mean, although the fit might not be necessarily so faithful. While in the deep learning machine learning algorithm, your fit might be excellent, and usually is, because these are sort of utilitarian speech technology, you know, applications. So they are developed by extremely clever engineers, you know, to work. So you get a very, very good fit, but you don't necessarily know, you know, how to interpret the fit. And so we talked about those, and we talked about applications to different type of typological questions, analytical questions to, you know, by these two types of algorithms. What did we do yesterday? That was one of those days, no? I think I got there. So, and then we had some hands-on work. So we did fit some type of classifiers, the other type of technology which also contains classifiers. Actually, the pipeline we ran through yesterday through a tutorial contains two classifiers on the top of each other, if you remember. You know? There's first the language identification model, it's a classifier itself, and then we apply the LDA classifier on the results. So it's sort of two classifiers on the top of each other. Just to make sure that we classify things well. So yes, as I said, today we are gonna go slowly and give some thoughts to all of the things which we learned. I would really today, I'm hoping to run today's session with Priyankoo more as a discussion. I would greatly appreciate your input. You know, we've said most of our stuff which we know. Now it's sort of to debate and to try to figure out. I have convinced Priyankoo that it might be a good way to do a little bit today of an exercise of the type which we do regularly in Finland, where the teaching, the sort of educational sort of practices are becoming more and more interactive. So at some point today, don't be scared, I will stop talking and I will ask you to maybe divide two little groups and debate, what you have heard, some of your ideas, in particular something relevant for you, your projects. What do you think and what the others think about that, and what the others might help you, and then we can discuss for 20 minutes, whatever, half an hour, depending on how much there is to discuss, and then you will sort of tell us more or less in few words. There's no need to prepare some formal report. In few words, what you discussed, and maybe the others can contribute to that. For the online participants, that would be the time when we are going to be here, Abhijit, Tukka, Priyankoo and myself, and we can talk to the online participants in the meantime. It's more difficult in Teams to divide participants into groups. I'm sure that it's somehow possible, but maybe it's going to be easier for them because the direct debate with the online participants was much less than the direct debate with the offline participants, so we might try to sort of compensate. And so if you have any questions, if I'm looking to the left and back, then I'm looking at the online participants list. If you have any questions or any thoughts, please think about that and try to, in about, I don't know, an hour, we will hopefully have time for that. So I'm going to just, there's going to be a lot of repetition today. It's essentially only repetition today. So, yeah. So we have, as I just was saying, we have covered sort of two basic types of machine learning in some sense. The things which are sort of type of fits and analyses which are derived from directly from the analyzed data with the relatively rigid algorithms. The fit is directly sort of interpretable on the data, like PCA and all sort of classifiers, QDA, LDA. Maybe the random forests type of classifiers can all be broadly included in this group. There is not a very straight boundary between those two. Anybody can argue their case that my favorite classifier actually belongs to the other group, and I have very little to actually the argumentation. But very broadly, it might be good to think about those things. So, these type of algorithms provide, as Priyankoo put it, sort of informed analysis. It's analysis of the material where we, first of all, the questions are explicit, the questions are theoretically informed, and data are also processed in the theoretically informed manner. We extract some particular features, some formant features for the vowels. There is a theory behind why the formants actually represent vowels. There is a sort of theoretical and practical concerns. How do we extract the formants from the vowels? Because all of these, speech sounds are kind of living things. It's very difficult to say where some ah in some utterance starts and ends, and when it becomes the real ah as opposed to some slide from the previous vowel and all that. So all of these things, where we extract the F0, where we extract the formants, all of those things are. So we have to make a decision, and we make the decision based on our knowledge, our expertise, and theoretical understanding of the field. These work very well on relatively small data sets. They work very well on big data sets, by the way, of course. So this is a praise rather than they only use these on small databases. No. They use excellently well on the big databases, but they also work very well on the relatively small databases. There are sort of many, I guess all of these type of classifiers, for example, are actually, you will learn them, details of them, in your stats classes, right? So these are statistical tools. So these are sort of all based on some sort of analysis of variance. Statistics is always analysis of variance. That should sort of ring the bell. We are here to analyze linguistic diversity, so surely statistics is the right place to go, because statistics is all about the analysis of variance. It's all about the analysis of, we have the idea of some value of some particular variable, you know, the pitch height, the tone 1 pitch in Angami, and then we record it and we kind of treat, there is a truth, we are trying to find this truth value, being aware that there is a lot of variance around that. So we're trying to sort of, you know, remove the noise, as it were. That's what, and these type of classifiers do more or less the same thing, or are based on the same type of principles, you know. PCA itself, for example, is trying to maximize the variance alongside the different dimensions. LDA is trying to minimize the in-class variance and maximize the between classes variance. It's all about statistical concept of variance. Variance just means sort of, you know, the kind of, you know, how far you are from the middle, or the real value, the estimate, as it is called. Well, the real value which we're trying to estimate using statistical analysis. Of course, we haven't. We could have another. We could start on Monday again, and try to retell this entire story in the Bayesian way of thinking. We would probably use quite a lot of the same statistical methods. We'll just talk about them a little bit differently. We'll talk about beliefs and about the evidence and all that. It would be another fascinating run. But here we were sort of, when we talked about statistics, we talk about this in more of the sort of frequentist, more still probably predominant way of talking about analysis. I guess when you are my age and giving this talk, you probably will say that, you know, we could do the same in the frequentist way, but we kind of did it in Bayesian, which is obviously the more prevalent because that's how the trend goes. The Bayesian way of thinking is sort of becoming to dominate the statistical parallel. These type of classifiers and the statistics-based sort of systems are usually very effective for the kind of controlled, targeted data. Again, these data which we somehow labeled based on some theories, which we extracted some features, which we use the theoretical knowledge to analyze, to pre-analyze. And then we can sort of try to find those kind of correct right values of different measures or whatever we are interested in. The other type of machine learning methods, which we covered quite extensively, are the deep learning based methods. You know, these are the methods which we, as sort of humanists, as linguists and phoneticians, sort of are taking back from the technologists, from the engineers. We helped them to build them, and now we're taking them back. So they are sort of cashing on our debt, on the debt. These usually, good thing about them, that usually these come many of these things come pre-trained on the unimaginable amount of data for us. You know, when we, as phoneticians, when we record 30 people doing something in 5 conditions of some sort and 10 repetitions of each, we consider that like the huge database. Almost no reviewer, unless you are trying to publish in some psychological journals, almost no reviewer will tell you like, go and collect more data. In phonetics, it's like, wow, this is amazing. Of course, these are drops compared to the amount of data these type of algorithms were fitted to. Again, these are, you know, as you probably know, we didn't sort of take it completely, but you know, deep learning is also essentially a branch of statistics. There's a lot of stochastic processes going on. Very often, we didn't sort of really talk about that, but very often they are very explicitly statistical. So, for example, when we were talking about the speech synthesizers, what the speech synthesizer, I was telling, you know, speech synthesizer can generate the waveform of some sort. What in fact they generate most of the time, very often, or for many intermediate steps, they generate probabilities over some possible set of, let's say, samples or possible sets of renditions and things like that. So they're also probabilistic machines. So these are also essentially the very large and complex statistical models which are fit to data. Again, apart from that, you know, your LDA might contain altogether maybe dozens of parameters, while some of these out-to-vex things or large language models contains billions of parameters. So it's just, you know, This is the order of, like, several order of magnitude different type of beast. They, of course, require relatively large corpora. Sure, certainly these foundational models like Vatuvec and the language identification things, those speech synthesizers, require a huge amount of data, huge corpora. Luckily, as we argued, and I'll sort of a little bit talk about that more, or yes, I'll talk about it a little bit more. For this analysis, we could get away with relatively much less, in particular because these things are pre-trained. In particular, when we want to do the analysis, which uses these pre-trained foundational models. If you want to build a machine learning model, which, like, for example, some generative models, which we have to train from scratch ourselves, then we need a lot of data. But if we use these pre-trained, sort of pre-fitted, is that a word? Pre-fitted knowledge, then we can actually, for analysis, do it on comparatively smaller amount of data. Of course, and I will be talking about this again, so again reiterating, because we were talking about that quite a lot, these are only really useful for particular type of questions. There are most questions we come up with. It's not maybe the ideal methodology to apply to. I'll talk about it. Some of you come to me every now and then and ask me some of the questions. Many of them I would say, like, this is cool, let's do that. But then there are some questions where I have to say, like, I'm not sure. But that, of course, just means that I'm not sure. And it's up to you or up to other people to sort of be imaginative. We had managed to address quite a few questions which we didn't know that we could, you know. So this is an open field. By the way, I actually don't have a slide about this, but I just now remembered, or earlier remembered when I was sitting here, that on the day one, as I said, I tried to get everybody thinking about speech, as opposed to, let's say, text-based corpora, or as opposed to some sort of syntactic, formal type of analysis, some type of, grammatical features of some sort and all that. All the methods we were presenting were sort of fine-tuned to the speech material, because we are speech scientists. We are in a different camp, The people who work with the text, they are them for us, And like, of course, privately we are friends, but officially across the corridor kind of thing. But many of these systems are also extremely effective in analyzing text-based material. You just need slightly different, of course, corpora, maybe slightly different way of thinking, and they are faced with different challenges when you analyze text-based corpora. One of the most obvious of the challenges, of course, is the script. I don't have to tell the Indians how many scripts there are out there in the world, because my feeling is that about half of Priyankoo will know precisely, half of the sort of sound-based scripts actually are used in India, and the rest of the world just basically just about scrapes about the rest. But of course, this is a little bit of a challenge when you have you want to compare the text from many languages, and they come in different scripts. This is not an unsurmountable challenge. There are ways, very clever ways, using things like machine translation, for example, where when you translate from, Telugu to Hindi, which use different scripts, you can have the machine translation system, which reads the Telugu script and produces the Hindi script, and somewhere in between, these scripts sort of disappear inside the machine. There is but there is still a representation of the language, which you can use in terms of kind of some sort of typological comparison. How much this is for them, for the text-based linguists, to kind of decide how much this type of representation, how much information it actually contains about the script, how biased is about the script. Because the other possibility is to sort of transcribe to translate all the different orthographies to some common orthography, But then, of course, you have to decide how to do that. Do it sound-based, and of course, then there are all sort of crazy issues with sort of arbitrariness of orthographies. Just take, I don't know, English. The sequence of characters. There's so much kind of arbitrary historical layers that it's what you might find that the English just simply don't know how to spell, essentially. That might be one of the things, because the spelling has nothing to do with the language. But anyway, but these are challenges to be faced by the others. But there is also very, very lively field of doing the text-based comparative analysis of corpora and many things like that. We have colleagues in Helsinki University. There's a language technology group, and they are again one of the sort of forerunners in this sort of text-based, machine translation-based typological analysis. Let's go back to speech. Let's forget the text thing. Let's go back to speech. So a little bit, let's talk about some good and sort of not so good points of these two approaches. There is a thumb up, and it's slightly different rendition to what I put in there. I'm hoping that some of these renditions with these, are not gonna turn out to something really strange. But so these classifiers have been proven again and again to be very successful to address many phenomena. For example, like Priyankoo was saying, his group of people here have applied all sort of classifiers on a lot of very interesting questions about the, Northeast Indian languages and many other languages, and so it works very well. It works super well. So, for example, when you have extracted some sort of set of features, a smallish set of features, I mean smallish because you have to extract it, that might require some manual labor. You can characterize whatever different classes of the analyzed material. You can assign you can assign the labels to them, explicit labels. That's one of the points, So you have fitted your classifier model on a bunch of languages in terms of what, for example, rhythm class they fall into. And then you have the new language, and you can sort of estimate, based on some carefully designed features, to what rhythm class that language might fall, or that particular dialect. Or do all the dialects of some particular language uniformly fall and happily fall into one rhythm class, or will they start being difficult and sort of span among multiple rhythm classes? All sort of things can be super well addressed using these methods. You can check how many different sort of characteristics interact with each other. This is what I was saying. Dialect and rhythm class, how they interact. We can see that this one falls to this dialect based on some particular classifier analysis, and falls into this type of rhythm class. Is it always that they fall into rhythm class, or is it some particular other things which cannot be shifting it left and right? Again, I'm not a linguist, so my linguistic knowledge is more sort of implicit. So that's why I often use the examples from my mother tongue, because essentially my last, I guess, formal class I've taken in formal linguistics was in my high school, my last Slovak class. So I never really studied linguistics. I studied math. I studied logic, which is a weird branch of linguistics, if you know what I mean, because it studies the properties of mathematical language, essentially. But I never really studied linguistics apart from that. I did study some phonetics, of course, and a lot of cognitive science. There was always some linguistics, and I read books, but I don't have really huge amount of examples. So in Slovak we have this thing that I probably told you that in the western side of the country there is one type of word lexical stress pattern, and in the other side of the country there is another type of lexical stress pattern, and they are both sort of borrowed from the neighbors, from the relative neighbors, and then you can look. I would love to do that. What happened in between? Because there's a bit of a mystery. People in middle, they kind of use both of those patterns, but it doesn't seem to become sort of lexically based. So even the people in the middle don't seem to be using the different patterns in terms of that some words would have used that pattern and some words would that pattern, so it would become sort of stress, like linguistically contrasting information in terms of stress. It seems to be that they use it sort of pragmatically. In some situations they would use that way, and in some situations they would use that way. So those would be things which you can study exactly using this type of data. You could build the classifiers based on these particular features and then feed them with the samples from somewhere in between and see where they classify and in what particular context they classify in one and the other. Of course, importantly, these type of analyses yield interpretable results. So if I run this type of analysis, I would, by the time I'm finished with that, I would have to spend a lot of effort preparing the data and conceptualize the data and figuring out how to measure this type of stress patterns, how to kind of quantify them. I would probably have to do a lot of manual work. But when I'm done, I would know straight away what really is happening and why. So maybe on the backside for what is it? No, backside. That's the wrong term. Well, the sort of downside of these, it's the right term, but for something else. The downside of the classifiers is that they usually require a relatively big amount of manual work. They're sort of annotating, labeling, thinking, arguing what would be the good ways of putting things, what would be the good ways of analyzing, whether we are going to extract F0 from the middle third of the vowel or from the 20th to 80th percentile or just from one value and why and all of those things. That requires a lot of thinking, effort, kind of discussions, and we've all been through these type of discussions and the arguments for and against everything. Of course, what comes from these discussions is hopefully the well thought out, controlled and carefully crafted data. Also, I've been saying this few times, this inevitably, because the way how we design our data set comes from a lot of these discussions and expertise and maybe trials and errors. The results and the entire process is theory driven. We have to have hypotheses. Hypotheses are often sort of pre-given. For example, we might classify things to 3 different rhythm classes, like stress timed, syllable timed, and mora timed. And then at the end, and we feed it some new language or something, new data, carefully drafted data, and then we get an answer that this is stress timed, or syllable timed, or mora timed. But what if it's something else timed? There's no option really. We will not get that answer. We can maybe interpret the data if there's something which doesn't fit really in either of them, gets really randomly classified. We might start thinking to come up with a new class for it. But then again, that's another theoretical decision. We come up with the 4th class and start investigating again. But usually we are not asking, we are not sort of exploring, we are drawing maps in some sense. If you have, if you have theoretical based studies, always prone to all sort of biases. History of science is full of all sort of biases, which were imposed on the theories. We can talk about that for hours and hours and hours. Many of those biases were rather tragic and have done a lot of harm. Of course, everything is theoretically biased, so it doesn't mean that theoretical bias is something necessarily tragic. It may be many of those theoretical biases were also extremely instrumental in coming up with the amazing stuff. But the theoretical bias there always is. The good thing about deep learning is that it works. That's when we started this exercise. When was it? 10 years ago or more over than that? We actually first wrote a proposal without trying it for this project. And then, surprisingly to us, we got the money. And then we went okay, will it even work? We had no clue. We didn't try it before. So, and it did work. And it does work, and it works more and more. And I hope we convinced you that even these deep learning methods sort of produce interesting results and work. Sometimes almost disturbingly so. You know, let's just think about our little corpus we designed, how well it worked. It's almost sort of spooky in some sense. As you saw with our corpus, these methods don't really require any sort of annotations. It was minimal manual work done on those. Okay, you did some manual, chopping those utterances into or those recordings into utterances. But of course, that can be also automated. And as a matter of fact, in particular, these WAV2Vec based analyses, they don't really even require the unit for which we can pool the information from WAV2Vec to be linguistically meaningful. It doesn't have to be an utterance. In many cases, when Tuukka we were analyzing some big databases, Tuukka just chops it to like 6 seconds, more or less, and that might work as well. Maybe remove some silence. So it much less load of any sort of manual processing before that, or any sort of signal processing. Usually, as we were arguing a few times and talking about that, if anything, signal processing is kind of harmful for these type of applications because it might leave some sort of trace. And the one thing we have to be kind of very aware of always, you have to be very consistent with all of these steps. That's why it's good that machines do that, because machines sort of impose that consistency. So we always try to write a sort of scripts for everything rather than doing manually, because then when you run the script, it knows that everything is being done more or less consistently. Well, very consistently unless you have a bug in a script, of course. Performance, as we saw as well, although they come with the massive pre-training, these type of systems, they, again, this is empirical fact rather than something given, something which we found out on the way, they perform well for untrained languages. So they learn to generalize. Of course, that's one of the core requirements from any good machine learning, that it generalizes. There are all sort of machine learning tricks and techniques how to ensure that your application generalizes. Generalizing means that it will do well for unseen data. When you do the speech synthesis system, of course, for example, you train it on a lot of pairs of text and sound. But of course, you want it to generalize. You want it to synthesize the speech for the text you'd never seen before. It would be a lame speech synthesizer, which could only repeat what it has heard. So that would not generalize. Happens as well. When it happens, you have to start redesigning your network. So the ability to generalize, of course, is sort of really core thing. But in these type of LID models, the language the demand or the requirement to generalize to the languages on which it wasn't trained is not necessarily the foremost thing in the minds of the designers. What they, of course, want to achieve is that it will generalize on the samples from the languages which it didn't see. So, it will classify any sort of English utterance as English, any sort of Hindi utterance as Hindi, but not necessarily that it classifies in any way some utterance from, let's say, Angami language, which it didn't see in the training as anything. But surprisingly, some portions of course, it cannot even classify Angami as an Angami because it doesn't have the, the bulb at the end which will light up for the Angami language. You only have those 107 bulbs, which will tell you, which will light up when it hears the language. These are, of course, no bulbs. These are some vectors and the probabilities and all that. So it doesn't have the one kind of value for Angami, so it cannot predict that it's Angami. But we know that somewhere some intermediate representations contain a lot of interesting knowledge, typological knowledge, also about the languages which it didn't see. So it generalizes well in that sense as well. These, of course, as we saw, are not necessarily, well, we can think about that. It's going to be, I'm going to continue on that on the following slide, but we found these type of analysis particularly good for generating new hypotheses. This is like sort of relatively rough exploration. You know, this is like sending drone somewhere to look around roughly. What's there? What might be there interesting? Before you send some sort of explorers who will start, you know, taking the samples, and this is like, you know, sending some sort of satellite to orbit the moon, as they did in the 60s, before they let anybody to land there. You know. We are working towards the landing as well a little bit, you know, but this is much more sort of exploratory, hypothesis generating exercise as we see it. Now, there are many downsides of deep learning. It requires larger amount of data. That is fine because it sort of compensates, you know, large amount of data, less work. Let's work with them. Usually, for the sort of standard phonetic analysis, it's not necessarily always the bottleneck or the problem to collect a lot of data. Sometimes, of course, it's a problem, like in particular field research. You know, like you have to go to the village and you have to find the people to record. You have to find the people who are, we were discussing that before, you have to find the people who are sort of relevant speakers of the given dialect for your type of question. And, you know, so it might be difficult to collect the data. But by and large, in sort of standard phonetic analysis, it's actually not a huge problem. There's plenty of undergrads around you can put to the recording booth and record them. But of course, the more data you have, if you have to do annotating, extracting features, the more work and longer it takes. Very soon you start running out of undergrads to do that work because you need the fully trained and people with expertise. So, yes, of course, we as phoneticians, we know, we spend a lot of time sort of annotating. One of the perks of the academic career, in particular for a phonetician, is that when you that's maybe one of the motivations for phoneticians in academia, is that when you sort of start climbing on the sort of career ladder, hierarchical ladder, the less annotation you need to do, you know. I haven't annotated a file for maybe 10 years. Of course, I have to do all the other, you know, administrative crazy stuff where I'm completely out of my depth. I really don't know what to do. But annotating, I'm saving on that. Mm-hmm. So if you're, you know, ever wondering why would I publish and apply for lectureships and later on professorships, this is one of the perks. Now, the deep learning is, of course, as we were discussing that extensively, only really good for some particular type of questions. We will talk about those questions in a minute, you know. This is something good to remember. They're not, well, not every question we can address as yet with our skills and knowledge by these type of methods. We are particularly good at measuring all sort of disinterpret. This is putting it kind of relatively mildly. They very often cannot be interpreted in terms of standard phonetic, phonological, prosodic, linguistic features. It's hard to say. We know that these dialects are further apart than these other two dialects, but we don't necessarily know why and what makes them further apart. This is also a theoretical question. I think we will be talking about that in a minute. Mm-hmm. Now, does anybody have any? So let's take a little break, 5 minutes to stretch. What time is it now? Yeah, almost 9:30. We started 9:30. Yeah, so let's take the little break until 9:30. It's like 6-7 minutes, and then we continue. Okay, thank you. So I guess we can continue slowly. So we ended up on this. We talked about the pros and cons for both sort of classifier-based standard machine learning techniques and deep learning techniques. And we identified few sort of cons, let's see where, for this deep learning type of approach, because this is a relatively new, novel kind of idea. I want to kind of a little bit go one by one these issues and maybe tell us something about, I mean, not new, but something which you didn't see before, results which might sort of a little bit mitigate and give some hope and maybe sense of direction. In Russian, it can be Russian, it can be Russian who grew up in St. Petersburg, almost walking distance from Finnish border, and might speak Russian one way, and then the Russian who grew up in Kamchatka, walking distance from Japan, as a matter of fact, or swimming distance from Japan. These would be classified as the sort of same type of language. Maybe it is, but we don't know. It's sort of so. How robust these type of results might be to this type of variation, which is inevitable in any data. And it doesn't have to be this crazy variation. Just pick different speakers, for example, or different samples, what happens? So we did test this for the world languages experiment or analysis. So you've seen this type of a pterodendrogram. This is a similar one. It's a different one to the one which I was showing you earlier. There is fewer languages, as you can see on that, and there are some numbers attached to those edges, to those sort of joining lines. So this is called consensus tree. So what we did, we only used languages which had at least 1,000 samples in a database for this particular purpose. That meant that we ended up in, if I remember well, 79 languages as opposed to 107. So those 30 odd languages had less than 1,000 samples. So we had to limit it to 1,000 samples. Why? Because we built the trees. We built actually 20 trees from 50 samples from each of the languages. And we made sure that those samples didn't even overlap. So we divided those 1,000 samples for each language randomly. We mixed them randomly to 20 50 sample bunches, and then built the tree from the 20 trees from these 50 sample portions. And then there's a technique how we can compare the resulting trees. That's called consensus tree. So this is essentially the tree which has these edges on more than a quarter of those examples, as a matter of fact, and it gives you the number at each edge in how many kind of trees the set of the languages following the fork always occurred. So, for example, here you can probably read it. Neither can I really. But here is like 25. That's not a very high number, but it means that in 25%, precisely Mongolian and Abkhazian were put together like this and nothing else. In all the others, maybe Mongolian was somewhere else or some other language got into that. Nevertheless, we can see that we get relatively robust relationships. So whichever sample you take, you get more or less the same tree. Maybe with some exceptions. These numbers are sort of very strict. It has to be precisely like that after that, or precisely the same like in this case. It is in 55% of the cases, precisely these languages were following this branch. These are some sort of Slavic languages. And this picks the most used edges. But you can see that the tree looks more or less the same. And it gives kind of typologically meaningful and nice results. So 50 samples is more or less the same, more or less enough. We done. I forgot to put the acknowledgement. I'm going to show another picture from the same paper. When it's published, you can look at it like there. We put another sort of argumentations. How many samples do you need? When you you evaluate the entire, you sort of build the thing on some selected number of samples for each language. You build the embedding sort of system. You can calculate distances between any pair of languages. And you can do that, you can subsample the data set many times for even as little as whatever 20 samples from each language. And then you can calculate always for each of these subsampling, calculate all the distances between those embeddings. And you see how the distances overall, this would be 100 languages, so 10,000 distances, how these 10,000 distances correlate with each other depending on a sample. And we get very high correlations, 90% roughly we reach for these 50 samples, and we reach over 70 for as little as, I don't know, 15, 20 samples. So it's quite robust. So the basic characteristics are captured quite well, basic distance are captured quite well. Of course, this is not some sort of rule of thumb that 50 samples is enough, you know. Or it all depends on what your data looks like, you know, how much unwanted variation, as we were talking, the source of unwanted variation you have there, how balanced these things are. These are actually rather pessimistic scenario. These were not really balanced in any meaningful way. So 50, it's surprised that the 50 would be quite good already. 50 samples. These are 50 utterances from the languages. It's really quite impressive. So it's 100 languages, so it's 5,000 samples from all around the world, and it sort of can create a typological map. I would be careful to present these type of results on some linguistic typology conference. I might be booed and thrown out from the building. So now maybe the kind of most burning issue is the sort of type of questions we can ask using this type of method. So this is good, as we have tried to see, this is good at sort of quantifying the effects of all sort of sources of variation, which are sort of difficult to quantify in any other way, right? Like, for example, if you have 100 odd languages from around the world and you want to assess their typological relationships among all of those, this is tough. This is not even really well-defined question, you know, because where do you start? What will you, like if you have two languages, it's fine. You know? In particular, if there are two sort of related languages, it's sort of doable and done a lot. You know, what type of, you know, does the language use suffixes or prefixes? What is the, I don't know, order of in the clauses and, you know, some grammatical things. So you need to extract some features, the same features essentially from both languages, and then compare them, how they are realized, right? But if you have 100, for each pair you have to identify a set of the same features. But how do you do that in 107 languages? Are there even any features which are shared among 107 or all languages in the world? As a matter of fact, no, there aren't. This is the fact from linguistics. This is where sort of the Chomskyan thing went to be this completely minimal theory, which sort of claims or had only one claim, because every other claim they made has been disproven. In structural claim they made has been disproven, and some counterexample was found. So this is tough, you know, to do typology on all world languages. It's sort of not possible really. So that's why this is a good technique for that. You might not kind of really know what you get, why, but you can do this quick analysis, and then maybe you can start grouping the languages into different sort of groups, classes, and then maybe start looking inside painstakingly and start comparing, or start figuring out why would, I don't know, there were some surprises here. Maybe they kind of dropped out from the why would Maltese be actually classified here among all of these Mediterranean Europe languages? Of course, geographically it makes perfect sense, but of course Maltese is a Semitic language, very different. Of course, what type of features are making it sound a lot like Portuguese, as a matter of fact? So then you can start looking into characteristics. I would bet that it's probably prosody and phonetic realization of the things, because this is something which is borrowed as opposed to structural. So this gives you many questions you can start addressing. But so this is probably prosody, but maybe this particular relationship here somewhere then is actually some sort of slightly different phonotactics maybe, or some other type of things. So again, you can get hypotheses maybe for this entire group here. You might find some features which can analyze together, but maybe not for all 107 languages here. So these are good sort of for, well, let's put it bluntly. This type of method we kind of came up with is really good for calculating distances among things, because we come up with numbers, come with vectors, and for vectors we can calculate distances among other things. That would be another, just occurred to me now as a mathematician. We can do a lot of other things with vectors than calculate distances. Maybe there's something to look into, some orthogonality among things. What would that actually mean? Well, we leave it for later. I haven't thought of that. So we can calculate distances among sort of languages and dialects, as we did on the previous slide, and we did it we have shown some Finnish dialect things, and we did our language comparison and what the accent in English. Sort of we can see the sort of dialects of English maybe, of Indian English and all that. But we can also do things on a little bit, I unfortunately didn't spend a huge amount of time sort of on this methodology, explaining things with which are a little bit more targeted. For example, this comes from very small database collected here about 2 years ago. These are Angami tones, if you are wondering what they are. So we collected the database, some recordings from, these were all, and Janine can correct me if she remembers better, or if I am completely off. We collected the data in sort of, one understand it's sort of standard Angami. Angami is spoken mostly in Kohima. And sort of people recorded, was it North Wind and the Sun perhaps, I guess? Was it some other story? I don't remember. Was it the North Wind and the Sun maybe? Or?
No, sir. It was some target words.
Yeah. Oh yeah, this was actually, yes, that's true. This was sort of target words. And no, I'm not sure. Yeah, anyway, some text. And then we labeled so this was some sort of target words from, no, but this was different. This was not a dialect. We did this extra thing where we coded some little text. And this was in standard Angami, and we asked the people from Kohima, well, maybe one or two, and from Jotsoma and from Kigwema to sort of read this text. So this was not necessarily about the Jotsoma Angami or Kigwema Angami or Kohima Angami, but sort of Jotsoma accented standard Angami. So we had the same-ish text, and then we labeled the tones. So they were technically the same phonological tones, because that's what people were used to. So they didn't, change the tones. Well, they changed them phonetically, as opposed to, they read the words which they might not use in their standard language, but in their daily language, but which was sort of the way how people speak in Kohima. And then so we annotated them. Well, this is this sort of royal we, they annotated them. And then we built this was this generative system where we trained these local conditionings on these three dialects. So it was sort of trained to produce this kind of only F0 and intensity based signal. And you see, I was saying when this conditioning, you can do this global conditioning. So you say that generate me the entire utterance in Hindi, or generate me the entire utterance in Jotsoma Angami. But here, we said from here to here, generate tone 1. And by the way, this is Kohima Angami. And this is tone 4. So when the synthesizer, as it were, was generating, it was called local conditioning. Every now and then, it was told from here to here, next sort of several samples, generate as if this is that type of a tone. And we train these embeddings in the same way as we train any other embeddings. These are local embeddings. So we had sort of three dialects. This A always stands for Angami in an unimaginative way. And then JO is Jotsoma, this is Kigwema, and Kohima. So we got representations from these four tones from these 3 dialects. This was a very small database. We did it in one afternoon in Helsinki together, this analysis. And this is what we got. So I really don't know whether this is any good, but or anything groundbreaking. But you can see that from right to left, more or less you go from tone 1s towards the tone 4. By the way, this seal here is actually not silence, but it's an embedding for anything else, which was not tonal in the speech. Every portion has to be locally conditioned. So we had this, and this is not a tone, something else. So this is what gathers everything. But you can see here, maybe you can start reading. So this is essentially tone 1 branch here. You can see that Guwahati and Kohima tone 1 is sort of branched together, and this is Jotsoma tone 1, but somehow the tone 2 from the Guwahati dialect sort of peeks into this tone 1 it sort of lumps together with the other tone 1s. Of course, it's distinguishable from tone 1 from Guwahati, but it's actually a lot like tone 1 in Jotsoma. So I don't know whether there is some tonal shift. Of course, this is only really, we had like, I don't know, 5, 10, 15 speakers, or 10 maybe, so maybe not even, I don't remember. And here are the tone 2s here, but again, they are sort of mixed a little bit, Tone 2 and tone 3 from Kohima, sadly, are sort of difficult to distinguish. But here are the tone 2 from Jotsoma. So tone 1 of Jotsoma is down here. Tone 2 of Jotsoma then is a little bit like tone 3 in the other languages. And tones 4 all come here. So tones 4 are clearly distinguishable. And there is a little bit of a mix-up between tone 1, tone 2, and tone 3. So how generalizable these things is difficult to tell. This was a small, very model sort of study, a lot like our own analysis. I guess whatever cute and cool results we got yesterday, I don't think we are going to publish it in Nature tomorrow. But if we want to do more of that, this is the way to go. So this is something very similar. But it produced meaningful results. And these are results about, again, sort of phonetic dialect realization of tone, smaller units than just sort of like languages, dialects, and what have you. So you can do that as well. This is, by the way, the very similar technique to the one which we used for the Swedish dialect classification. So if you want to know more, maybe that would be the paper to look at and to read. We have also some similar papers to this when we use local conditioning on the dialects of northern Sami languages. There was a big database and we compared all sort of other tonal things. Well, quantity type things. So you can compare not only sort of entire language dialects, but other maybe more fine-tuned tonal, prosodic, quantity, whatever. Of course, vowel quality, all those type of phenomena among dialects, languages, local sites, and what have you. Now, we were talking about the results are difficult to interpret, but of course it wouldn't stop us from trying. So this is one of the examples of, maybe I need some sort of glasses for this. Oh yeah, one of the examples of trying to interpret the results which come up from machine learning beyond drawing the dendrogram or putting things on a map or maybe making some sort of projection of the LDA first components or PCA components. So it's something slightly different type of analysis. So these are those world languages, I think all 107 of them and all that. And there's many more dots than 107, as you can see. So there is a dot here for every pair of languages. Because of course the embeddings or the sort of the latent representation of languages are whatever 512 dimensional vectors or 1024, I don't remember, big ones. But distance between them, and we know that you can define distance between two vectors, is just single number, right? So we have roughly 10,000 dots on this figure, which each represents the distance between a pair of languages, right? So we had this big database essentially of distances of single numbers. And then, of course, we also, with all of those caveats we were discussing yesterday and Tuukka was talking about and I was repeating today, also get a similar type of, well, same size of thing, of the distances in terms of geographical distances between the languages. So for each pair we have the embedding distance between how our system perceives, what is the distance between these two languages in terms of how they sound, and then also geographical distance between these sites, right? And then a third thing, we looked at we wanted some sort of typological distance, some sort of traditional typological distance. And there are some measures, there are some Python libraries, surprisingly, which can give you, given ISO code, all of the results from pre-trained models. And one of them is the lexical distance, right? So this is built on some type of word list, I'm not sure, some Swedish or maybe something bigger, some list of some sort of Levenshtein distance between different words. When you have two sort of strings, you can somehow calculate the distance between these two strings. Yeah, there is some particular way. It's called Levenshtein distance. It's a more or less sort of how many replacements you need to make in order to make one string like the other. So there is, and of course you can then average it, and these people know what they are doing. I really don't know what they are doing, as a matter of fact. Lexical distance. So it's a sort of measure, rough and ready measure of sort of family distance between two languages. So if we have very closely related languages, this is going to be relatively small, and if we have very distinct languages, this actually, as a matter of fact, would be sort of infinite, because the languages come from very different families. This just doesn't work. So there is some random value they put, I think, to yeah. Mm-hmm. Because of that, now I needed to check my slides, so I have to roll back a little bit. I said we have 107 languages, and so this will be 10,000 dots here, but there isn't. Because of this lexical distance is meaningless between the languages from different families and actually undefined in this particular library, because there is no way of getting the word jeden, which is one in Slovak, and word yksi, which is one in Finnish, somehow together, or they're gonna decide that whatever there is would be coincidental. Those are languages from different language families, so, Indo-European and Uralic. So these are only the distances between the languages which are from the same family, right? So there is a lot of dots because we have a lot of Indo-European languages in the database. So like more than half of them are Indo-European, so this is like if there's 60 Indo-European languages, so it's 60 by 60, whatever. So there is that many dots at least, and then fewer number of dots for the other type of languages. So we have the embedding distances, and on one hand, and then we have the geographical and lexical distances. So what we did was we built a normal standard linear regression fit to how well can we predict the embedding distances from a combination of geographic and lexical distances. Normal linear model, embedding distance is a function of the geographic and lexical distances with interactions. So the fit was pretty good, as a matter of fact. I don't remember precisely, but overall, because we did it in many ways, again, hopefully the paper will get published so you can have a look. But the R square of that fit was something in a level of 70, 0.7. So it's very predictable from these two effects. So it probably does some typology, Both of those influences were significant and positive, meaning, the more geographically distant 2 points are, the bigger the embedding distance. The more lexically distant are, the bigger the embedding distance. And the interaction was also significant. Interaction was significant in a sense that for more more closely related languages, so for the languages with the less lexical distance, the slope dependence on the geographic distance is steeper, right? Which means that for more closely related languages, it matters more whether they are geographically close or further than for less related languages. By the way, the fact that the embedding, this is important note, actually I don't remember whether we made this in a paper and maybe we can add it even as a revision, that the fact that the embedding distance correlates well with the lexical distance does by no means mean that somehow the embedding contains some lexical information in them, right? It doesn't mean that. It just means that they probably correlate both of them together well for different reasons with some sort of familiar relationship between the languages, right? So the lexical distance doesn't mean that exactly the same way as that somehow the embedding would contain some geographical position of those things. That would be ridiculous. It's equally, probably slightly less, but probably equally ridiculous is the fact that they would contain some lexical information directly there, right? Now, so you can see here, so this is rather big plot, you know, a lot of going on here. So here we have because this is two-dimensional fit and we didn't want to put two-dimensional picture, so we try to put it in one dimension. So the geographical distance on the x-axis, so these pairs here are close together. For example, this dot here is Norwegian and Swedish. And these two, the pairs, the dots here correspond to the languages spoken geographically far apart, right? And then the coloring of the dot depicts the lexical distance between those two languages. So if it's a dark one, if it's a blue, then they're close. And if it's a sort of light yellow, then they are far. So you can see that, you know, the embedding distance, you can see that the color of the dots, well, we can see first of all quite clear relationship, quite clear regression line that, you know, that the embedding distance depends on the geographical distance. There is a bending, but the bending is there because of the interaction. And then you can see that there are more blue here. Oops. There are more blue points here and more yellow here. So the closer, the more lexically related, the closer embedding in general distance. You can see that Hindi and Urdu, actually, as a matter of fact, are here. They are the lowest most point in terms of embedding distance. The embedding distance between Urdu and Hindi were the closest in all entire database, and it's also the kind of the bluest point as well. So the lexical distance is probably close to 0, as a matter of fact. Mm-hmm. So, and here you can see that because interaction is difficult to plot in these two things, but this is sort of, there are these 3 regression lines, and these are 3 regression lines for different lexical distances, roughly, you know. So if the languages are lexically far away, then the fit is like this. The fit between embedding and geographical distance is like this, not so quite shallow. Then if they are far away, the similarity, embedding similarity, is not so much dependent on how far they are geographically. If they are more closely related, the slope is steeper. This is the interaction in that model. If they are closely related, the slope is steeper, meaning that for closely related languages, the dependency is stronger. Mm-hmm. And here we plotted all sort of outliers. These are the outliers. These are the pairs. These are handpicked more or less. I think we generated like 50 or so, the outlying pairs, and then just sort of handpicked so that we can actually fit them in a picture and they are not on the top of each other. So they are not completely handpicked, but we just sort of for graphical reasons. And you can see that, so these up in green, these are the pairs for which the embedding distance was actually closer than predicted from geography and relatedness. So for example, Hindi and Urdu. And one can go through all of Norwegian and Swedish. One can go through all of these pairs, more or less, and realize why that would be. One of the obvious one here is Afrikaans and Western Frisian. You know, Afrikaans is the essentially descendant of Dutch, spoken in South Africa. Western Frisian is descendants of Dutch spoken in the Netherlands, in northern Netherlands. So they are, of course, lexically very, very close. The embedding distance is really, really low, but the geographical distance is massive. This is a result of colonialism, of course. There would be few other examples of that. There is a, I don't know, English and Irish is one of those examples where the embedding distance is actually really low, but they are lexically very distinct. So again, the embedding distance would be lower than predicted by the other things. And here on the top side here are the outliers the other way around, where the embedding distance, the distance between how the languages sound, as if you wish, is bigger than predicted by the interaction between by the effects of the geographical and sort of family distance. One of the notable pairs here is Assamese and Northern Kurdish, right? So they clearly sound more different than you would think, essentially. That's what it is. So that means that they are lexically actually quite far, also geographically quite far, but they sound yet more different from each other than you would think, right? I have no deep insights into Assamese and Northern Kurdish, but maybe you know why that would be. So they are, I guess, both Indo-European languages, but really the history is quite far. Funnily enough, there was not that many other Indian languages up here. So Assamese, of course, is the sort of easternmost Indo-Aryan language, I guess, and Kurdish, I don't know, it's probably not Indo-Aryan language, or is it? I don't know, is it? Yeah. So it's probably the westernmost Indo-Aryan language, so Tuka was nodding feverishly, so maybe, they are as far as it gets. And with very different influences, of course. With Assamese might have influences from exactly northeastern languages, for all we know, and Kurdish most likely Semitic languages and Turkic languages. Mm-hmm. So yeah, so this is something like we could spend a lot of time looking at that. Almost every pair you find being somewhere strange has a sort of history and can be interpreted. So this is what I was trying to say. It's not completely, we end up with these distances and a bunches of numbers, but it's not that we cannot sort of do some further interpretation. We always come with some idea and try it, and how to. This is again visualization, but there is a bit of analysis. We can put numbers on these outliers. This is not just sort of looking at where they ended up on the map, but we can put like these are this much different, and then they should be predicted. Mm-hmm. And the fact that this fit is relatively strong and relatively robust, as I said, it's in the order of 0.7 R square. So the correlation is sort of even higher between predictions and the real values. That for us means that we are doing typology, after all, of some sort. This is not the right computer. Yeah, there is one more little thing. I'm going to a little bit cheat here with this slide. So take this a little bit sort of metaphoric, because anyway, I'll tell you why. So remember that I just copied this picture from yesterday or whatever, where this is our pipeline, where we throw in the signal and goes through these contextual WAV-to-WEG embeddings, and then we run it through the language identifier. And I said, we gain the fixed length vector. Like from here on, these are fixed length vectors. This attention layer makes sure that it pools them together, translates the sequence of vectors, sequence of any possible length, to a single, summarize them in a single vector, and then we do some processing steps here, So, but when I said, we take the fixed length vector from here, because that's just before the kind of probabilistic prediction is made by the network. But of course, we can pick those, plug the network anywhere, earlier or later. We can see how these particular things look, how these things look, right? So we would assume that this first layer, before all these processing steps, as I said yesterday, these processing steps, these are convolutional processing steps, if I remember it right. So they mean that they turn one type of a signal to the other. They sort of multiply it and turn it around and put some sort of, this is sort of a lot of filtering, as it were, on these vectors. So you would have thought, so there's a lot of kind of filtering which is designed to grasp these features which are relevant for language identification going on here in these processing steps. So you would have thought that this first layer contains a lot of information about the signal itself, sort of kind of, yeah, signal-based information, while as you go further down, this last layer is sort of fine-tuned to contain a lot of information about the sort of, you know, typology of the thing, you know, what all the information is relevant for making decision from language it comes. So you would have thought that, you know, that as you go from left to right, you can, you know, you lose the signal, the information which is in the signal, and it's replaced or, you know, transformed to the information which is relevant for the decision, right? So in theory, so we can pull the vectors from here and from here, and what you can do is you can extract from all of these utterances. Now you can put back to your phonetician and signal processing type expertise hat and extract all sort of prosodic features like we normally do. F0, standard deviation of F0, I don't remember what else. You know, MFCC coefficients, voicing amount, whatever. You know, there is actually even a standard set in signal processing world of these 128 or whatever features. So we did that, and then you can check how well these different features, or how well these vectors predict these different features, right? Again, using such simple linear regression. So the feature value, so standard deviation of F0 is the one number, and you have like 512 values of the vector. Can you combine these? Can you fit the linear model which predicts from these vector features this particular prosodic feature? And you can measure how well it does it. You know, so from that you get some sort of rough measure of how much the F0 is actually contained in this latent vector. If it's an easy task for the model to predict F0 from the given vector, then the vector must contain the information somehow encoded. If it's a difficult task, then that information is lost. So we did something like this. This is where I'm cheating a little bit, because we use sort of slightly different machine learning technique, actually, as a matter of fact. So we didn't extract these layers from exactly this type of the machine learning system, but from the other one, but very, very similar. Yes?
How do we actually implement that?
Say again?
So how do we implement that, like extracting information from between the layers?
How do we manage to extract the information between the layers? How do we extract those layers? Well, this is purely sort of technical question. So it depends a lot on the type of implementation you have. For example, we use PyTorch implementations of these type of things, and in PyTorch it's actually very simple because there is a very explicit processing, this forward processing way of the network, and you can literally just return the value which exists in the networks at some point, and you just sort of store it. In TensorFlow, it's slightly more complicated than in the other Keras. It was, I don't remember, maybe easier. No, maybe even more. I don't remember. You know, so this is just a programming question. This is a question of programming. When you run the network, you run the computer program. So when you run the network, it's not some magic happening somewhere. You're running a computer program which takes this as some variable, fits this as a variable, and produces new set of variables here, a new set of variables here. So you just spit them out like from a normal program. You know, when you calculate, when you run the Pratt script, we of course kind of at the end stored things in some table, but we had some values in the Pratt script which we could have printed out as well on the run. So this is very much like that. You literally just spit them out, just return them and store them in some database. So that's how you do that. We have, of course, these big vectors, and then you try to predict using very simple linear regression, try to predict prosodic features. So you have, 1,000 features. How can I predict this one number from these 1,000 numbers? And this is what we got. So this is, you can see, these actually much smaller dimensionalities. This is a different, there is a paper, you can read it. But in principle, it's a very, very same thing. We could have done it here, we just didn't. We did it in another paper on the Finnish dialects. And what we get is this, look, that these are the acoustic measures, so speaking rate, F0 mean, F0 standard deviation, spectra tilt. It's a measure of the sort of softness or harshness of the voice. Remember, the first day we were talking about the slope of the declination in harmonic sound, how slow the energy sort of dissipates with the harmonics. And then this was average F1, average F2, average F3. This is how rough the measures are, you know. But you can see that, and this is the R, this is R square. R square for the linear regression is a predictor of how good the fit is, how reliable the fit is. So it goes between sort of 0, as a square between 0 and 1, and more closer to 1, the more faithful the fit is, the better at predicting the dependent variable, the independent variables are. So this is very high. All of these are very high. It means that it can predict, so this is actually some sort of square of the correlation between the predicted values and the real values, right? So this is very high. So it means that this layer here, from that layer you can predict all of these acoustic characteristics very well. So this layer, the first processing step, this wave-to-vec encoding, actually does contain information of all of these things. So at this step, it's there. But as you crunch it through the, give me what's relevant for the fine-tuning, for the predicting what language it is, it contains that information much less. They are still relatively interesting numbers, but they are much lower. So that this last layer does not necessarily always contain the huge amount of information about F0 mean, standard deviation, speaking rate as such. Or does contain it, but much less, right? This is actually sort of run in a slightly different thing. So this would be, we extracted it, we built this actually might be relevant here. I didn't try to talk about that for those of you who are interested. We actually build this combination of these wave-to-vec and classifiers. So we build essentially for Finnish dialects separate classifiers for each pair. So we're like 14 square classifiers. I don't remember how many took train them. And this is so, and for each of these many classifiers, so these are binary classifiers between two Finnish dialects. For each of these binary classifiers, we did this procedure. So that's why you have this standard deviation here, which means that, this is the average across all of those pairwise classifiers, and this is the standard deviation here. You can see that these R squares are really, all of them really high, and standard deviation is minute. So this first step really didn't do much in terms of processing. They all pretty much contain, all of those many classifiers contained roughly the same amount of information about these acoustic features, the prosodic features. And here you can see that these numbers are lower, but the standard deviation is much higher. For example, for F0 mean and F0 standard deviation is 0, it's like more than that. Which means that for some pairs that needed to retain this particular information, and for some other pairs it didn't need to retain that information. So this would be one of the first steps, how to start a little bit unearthing what's going on. We could have, and we might, if we don't keep too busy with all of this teaching and all that, might sort of start looking into, so for which pairs of Finnish dialects F0 standard deviation is actually important, as opposed to which. And then we can start creating hypotheses that, maybe for these two dialects, or these two dialectal groups, one of the main sources of difference is F0 standard deviation and things like that. Of course, we can build many more features. So it's not all doom and gloom. There are ways to kind of start poking and analyzing what's really going on. There's little, ways of peeking into the black box. And exactly as your colleague asked, there are ways to pick in a black box because it's black, but it's not so much of a box. It has a lot of holes, so we can let the information leak out from that. And we can exactly pull all of this information if we want from that, because it's a program. Now, so in future, of course, we need more and more and more effort into this type of opening the black boxes, right? So that's your job, by the way, mostly. Sorry to say. Of course, this is not particular concern or concern particular to the field of modeling linguistic diversity and prosodic typology with machine learning, but to the entire massive field of deep learning and artificial intelligence. Just think of large language models. You know, those are big black boxes, and it's of almost matter of survival of human race to try to reverse engineer a little bit and know what's going on, right? And all of the AI things. So if you start kind of bit by bit opening the black box in these type of ways, you're not going to be on your own. There is loads of people who are trying to do just that. So there is a lot of methods, a lot of new discoveries, a lot of new ways coming on every day, how to analyze, how to little bit try to open up the black box and peek in. Mm-hmm. Now, we talked about this earlier. This is just something which is like super important to reiterate, is that we need to remember the other issues. So we have this black box issue, which is sort of security and ethical issue on its own. Security issue because if the AI systems start more and more dominating our daily life and we don't really know what they do, you know, it's not so good. Of course, in particular because we have very short, we know what they do, but we know how they do it. It's not very good because we have short time to adapt to that. Like I would say they're very similar with the elephants, which are very useful tools, but it took thousands of years to, and we don't really know how they really operate that much, but it took thousands of years to sort of ease them into the society bit by bit, while these took a couple of years. So it's the same type of a tool, same type of a black boxy tool we don't understand, but yeah, so we need to open it up. So it's a security issue and privacy issue as well, because who knows whose data is actually there and who knows how they can be recovered. When you ask ChatGPT some question, who knows, maybe it's actually directly copied from secret thoughts of Priyankoo Sarmah, which he put on his phone and the Google stole it. We don't really know. You know, all of these things are relevant. But of course, for us as speech scientists, we need another layer of security and privacy because we are working with the human biomarkers. We are working with something very similar as DNA. So this is a medical conference with people, sort of physiologists, and we are now collecting and analyzing DNA. It would be trivial that we have to be a little bit careful about that we just can't just leave it or pour it down to the canal when we leave or something like that, or give it out as a present, you know, to the passers-by. So this is a little bit similar. Well, this is a lot similar with what we do here. We also collect biomarkers, so we have to make sure that we're talking about this. We're talking about some principles and some in some sort of detail, but we always have to be aware that when we work with these deep learning things and with a lot of data, we have to remember that we have to be extra careful to how we share and how we process those things. So we have to remember, and this is easy to say as a matter of fact. I do say it every now and then I sort of do something like collect the data from all of you and go a little bit like, sure, you know, we're gonna get away with that. But, you know, but it's still good to, it's easier said than done, as a matter of fact. I'm well aware of that. It takes a lot of effort. It's kind of costly as well. And it's a laborious thing. And of course we want to, in particular in the situation of Northeastern India, we are not only talking about protecting the privacy and security of individual participants, but we are talking about their communities, because the communities are so small, sometimes so fragile, that we can really sort of make damage of which we are cannot even sort of start thinking what type of a damage. Mm-hmm. I remember I was in Kigwema and we met the local sort of I don't know, representatives of the village, and they were very friendly, very helpful, super welcoming. We were talking, having some tea, and then we prepared to ask, like, what are you doing? You know, try to explain why are we recording this, and what are we training the students about. And they of course asked extremely well-educated people who actually were you know, we had a very nice debate about that. But then they asked me like, so what is in us? What is in it for us? Not like, you know, give me something, but you know, what can I tell to my fellow villagers that why I welcome these people in the village? And this is a tough one, you know, for me. So of course, you know, everybody has to come up with some answer. But it's good to be aware of this answer before you go to these communities. So they will ask you, and they have full right to ask you. And it's our full duty to be able to answer that. And if you don't have the answer, maybe just go home, you know, because it's sort of. So, let me see. Oh, so using standard methods like, what about prosody? So we were talking about that a little bit, you know. Using standard methods like classifiers might be actually better for addressing sort of well-defined questions in prosodic analyses and other things. You know, we can also, we saw the Swedish example, Angami example a little bit. We can also use deep learning methods if we have a lot of data, a lot of interesting data, and we don't really know how to perhaps, for example, if this Angami example would also work very well if we didn't know how to conceptualize the Angami tones. Now we know that they are all-level tones. So we know that we can conceptualize them to some level by sort of F0 in the middle of the tone. But if we didn't know that they were level tones, this technique would work equally well. This is agnostic. So this would be the example where we might analyze some particular prosodic patterns, which we don't know what are the right features to characterize them. If you have falling tones and all sort of dynamic tones, again, you might have, you know, Chinese rising tone or something like that. So now you would go, okay, so I need some F0 at the beginning or in the middle and some slope. But what if the tone is in some language like that, you know? You have to then kind of, how many plops there are? Remember the Swedish actually, you know, accents, which were not just falling, rising, or they were kind of rather complex tones. So then how many kind of parameters you need to characterize that? You know? So, but these techniques you can use when you're agnostic to these. This is what I meant by this theory bias, as it were, and theoretical preparation. But of course, we need a little bit more data. This is some speculation here, which sort of arises sometimes in our lab and with our discussion with Priyankoo, and actually here it arose as well. Then maybe for these large kind of multilingual comparison, if you want to do the prosodic typology on the world languages, you know, this is sort of difficult because we need to remove the non-prosody from that. So one easy way would be to sort of delexicalize all of those recordings. So there are many ways how to lexicalize them. They are, you can just low-pass filter them to some extent, or you can, I don't know, do the hum in Praat, or we have our own hum which you can create, or you can actually get the inverse filtering and get just the vocal source, or whatever, just to make sure that you keep the only sort of prosodic relevant characteristics there in the signal itself. And then you can run it through the pipeline as we did. Afterweg, all of those. Summarizing language identification. What's the problem with that approach? Why did we not? Because this is something Tuka can do in overnight, because it will probably take overnight to delexicalize all of those characters, but then another overnight to run the train the network. So what is the problem? Why do we not? Why are we sort of a little bit hesitant, or rather, we will do it actually next week or so, but I'm a bit skeptical about that. Why? What is the problem with that approach?
Is there any prosodic information that remains in the lexical?
Oh yeah, after delexicalization you can say that only prosodic information remains. So it would be sound which sound like you can keep all sort of things. You can it's sort of like essentially only obtain the source, the voice source information, which contains most of the what we would call prosodic. So yeah, all the tones, all the pitch would be there. So and there would be no as, es, os, and kus, and yes. It would be just no segmental information, but purely the prosodic information. So that's fine. So we would, if we got some results, got some clustering, and got some things, we would be sure that it's only prosody and nothing else. That's easy. But what is the problem? Would we get this sort of good dendrogram? Maybe. Why am I doubtful? Remember that we are working with these pre-trained systems. Like the wave-to-vec is a pre-trained system, and then language identification network is a pre-trained system as well. So wave-to-vec is pre-trained system on human speech. Not a pre-trained system on the lexicalized speech. We don't know what it will think of that. It will think of that something. It's a computer program. You give it inputs, you get outputs out. It doesn't kick you, you know, or doesn't start sulking or saying like no. You do, but how can we rely on those numbers? We don't know what it is. And of course, does language identification, the second step, that's not trained on the lexicalized stuff either. So we don't know. Of course, the wave-to-vec is something which we cannot really retrain on the anything. It's just so big that you need to be meta to retrain that. But the language ID thing, that's a small network. We can retrain that. So we might try just about that. But of course, we still are at the mercy of what the wave-to-vec make from this signal. It is not actually meant for. It's not really trained for. So this is one of the issues with these type of things. But it's worth a try. You can beat us to it if you want, and we see what happens. Now, there are a couple of slides before we hopefully start you discussing about this sort of linguistic diversity in India. Like one of the things about the specs of this lecture was to talk about Indian context. I'm not sure whether I'm like qualified, you know, this sort of Central European mathematician coming to tell you about the linguistics in Indian context. Maybe it's a bit cheeky. Priyankoo is there to kind of keep me, on a path. You can shout when I start talking rubbish, but I don't have huge amount to say. I guess, of course, for me, I can see from sort of distance what I can see here and what I don't see elsewhere, right? Of course, there is a lot of somewhat less explored and under-resourced languages. Priyankoo himself, almost every day, he mentions that he has some data somewhere from some language of which I haven't heard of, you know. And we've known each other for years, so imagine how many languages he's thrown at me over those years. And they keep coming, you know, new ones. So I have no clue. If somebody asks me how many languages are, how many people like you speak around here, I just have to kind of, it's just a lot, you know. So this is super cool for, you know, this is a main ingredients to be able to study linguistic diversity, that you have linguistic diversity, and we have plenty of that here. Of course, there is also kind of rather interesting phenomenon in India for me. So this is clear-cut. This is one of the, like, northeastern India is one of the, like, unique places in the world. There is maybe 5-6 places like this in the world, like Papua New Guinea and Dagestan and a handful of other places where the linguistic diversity is sort of this magnitude. That's easy. And of course, what I find particularly sort of interesting is this sort of level of multilingualism here, this natural multilingualism. You know, as a European, I grew up as a European of my age, I grew up in this sort of country where everybody spoke only one language essentially. Apart from that, at school they taught us Russian because that was compulsory because there were occupational forces there, and then some other language, maybe English. But I learned English at school, and it wasn't like sort of real language, it was a subject, you know. So I couldn't claim, nobody in my society could really claim that they are bilingual, you know. We were monolingual and spoke some other languages, if you're lucky, potentially. And this was situation all over Europe, apart from maybe some exceptions, like in Finland where there are 2 official languages, but even in Belgium when there are 4 official languages, as a matter of fact, or 3, 4 maybe, the very few people actually speak multiple of those. But in India, it's slightly different. Traveling around India, I always find it fascinating that 2 people meet somewhere. This Assamese person meets some auto driver in Goa, and they just, you know, figure out the language all of a sudden which they speak. I remember when we were taking the car from Goa to Dharwad, and Gautam was sort of chatting essentially all the way with the driver. And at the end I asked him, like, what language did you speak? And he kind of gave it a thought, and he's like, well, I think it was Hindi. The only thing is I don't speak Hindi, you know. But this is sort of deep multidimensional multilingualism. It's not that you speak a sequence of or list of languages of some sort. You figure out the code with anybody. I find this super fascinating because this is sort of prerequisite to things like language change and creolization, which are really the most exciting things they are in linguistics.
So that is why, like, you know, some of the questions that we asked yesterday were so interesting. For example, like, you know, if you are surprised to see Assamese or Bengali in totally different ways, it is not surprising actually, because the amount of contact that has happened over the years, you don't know where they manifest there and whether they are, like, you know, these other like, you know, very family-based, or like, you know, Indo-European family-based or Tibeto-Burman family-based features, how well they are preserved. I mean, I guess that there are two ways of looking at anything. One with a preconception that they all belong to separate classes, and only if they belong to separate classes and in the purest form is what we are going to analyze. The other is that, like, you know, take a very like, you know, broad overview, right, and have a broad outlook and look at the data with no sort of bias, and then see where you go. So I'm more prone to, like, I encourage everybody to, of course, such kind of preconceptions are very important in our context, in the Indian context, but it is also important to have this unbiased and very open outlook in analyzing any sort of data, any sort of specifically, like, you know, the linguistic data that we talk about in this country, and specifically in the very much under-researched languages.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah.
We don't know where the boundary has actually faded and where one is overlapping with the other.
Yeah, absolutely. We have this other kind of somewhat orthogonal debate with Priyankoo and some other people from actually India and Finland and other parts every now and then, where, like, essentially, I'm not a linguist, I'm not a trained linguist, so I never been to a class in linguistics where somebody, the professor with authority, comes and tells me language is copy and this. So nobody ever told me what language is. So as a phonetician, you know, I just tried to sort of figure it out by some sort of osmosis. And I still haven't figured it out. I have no clue what language is. I know what human speech is. I know what utterance is. It's fine. But I don't know what language is. And of course, there are multiple schools of thought. I'm not the only one. And this was exactly what Priyankoo said, that there is this sort of one way of seeing language as some system, abstract system with some structural properties. Or then there is the other way to see the languages sort of emergent patterns in human communication. So when you want to start talking about language, you start a lot like in our systems here. You start with the individual speaker, potentially individual speaker with the individual situation, and you see where does it lead you. You know, what are the common patterns when two people speak together, and what are potentially common patterns when this person speaks with this person here. So that's a sort of bottom-up way of looking at the language, and the language is just it's an unfinished, undefined entity, which is the tool for communication, and all its characteristics are fully determined by this function and this type of pattern of usage. But we are not here to do this sort of linguistic kind of philosophical debate. But the Indian situation gives itself, the European situation I was describing earlier, yield itself to the interpretation of separate languages as separate different structural characteristics. You know, I was taught at school what Slovak was, although even that time I had doubts, because the teacher once came and she told us that whatever inflectional things we used in our local dialect is wrong. I remember we were like 11-year-olds, and we just like the recess break. We were like, she said it was wrong. Like, how is it wrong? Always worked for me. you know. But we were told this is wrong, don't do that. Don't use that particular inflection point. So there was already this type of, but that's the idea. The language, Slovak language is this type of structure. But in India, this starts breaking up, you know. It sort of starts going like, oh, you know. What is Angami language, as a matter of fact? That's the first question, you know. Like, this starts breaking up. It's a collection of communicative habits between people. So this leads to very many very relevant questions. Sort of kind of interesting, sort of small, well, small, I don't mean small questions, but sort of very targeted questions. Small in the sense of a scope, to all of these broad philosophical questions. All of that is here, in my opinion. Of course, there is a lot of data here, potentially, you know. A lot of people, essentially, you know. So a lot of languages. The question is, how can we source corpora? With some of you, I was talking about this. We use some results from Donate Speech, Lahjoita Puhetta campaign in Finland, where there was this campaign run by our colleagues in the Language Bank and the State Tele, where they urged people to call in and donate their speech. And it was really advertised on telly and, you know, for about 2 months or 3 months, kind of 2 years ago maybe. And yeah, and it really worked. Of course, there had to be some system which received them and generated some questions for them and recorded them and stored it safely, stored metadata safely and all that. It was some app actually. So there is a little bit of work. And of course, there was probably 5 engineers which made the app, and probably 15 lawyers who were checking that everything is sort of right and legal and secure. But that was relatively easy, and it was super efficient. We ended up like with thousands of hours of speech from all sort of people who we couldn't possibly get to the studio. So who knows? Can we replicate some? I'm not even sort of thinking the all Indian campaign. That would be crazy now, you know. Potentially even with, I don't know, a legal situation, maybe even the legislation around the data storing might be state dependent and what have you. But you know, there is so many, you know, like Assam wide or Guwahati would be something you can think about. Maybe that would be cool. Of course, even this type of crowdsourcing and having this type of data, ending up with data, requires a lot of work. This is what's super interesting and important. Like, this is almost last words I have to say here. Super important for this course, that you might have sort of understood something better and maybe something somehow less well something else. And this is fine, because this is multidisciplinary effort. This is a multidisciplinary field. You know, this takes linguists, phoneticians, machine learning specialists, computer scientists, and who knows, you know, signal processing people, lawyers, as a matter of fact, administrators, millions of people. This cannot be done on your own. We don't do it on our own, of course, you know. So, of course, so we have to be aware that, you know, I will not understand every little corner. Important is this is what we tried with this course, and we don't know, we'll see whether we succeeded, to kind of give you some rough idea. Not necessarily to understand everything, but rough idea that there exists something which I don't understand, but I roughly know how to use it, or perhaps roughly know who to ask. And of course, in India, all of these people are available. In IITG, all of these people are available, as a matter of fact. So this is another kind of great things around here. This is not necessarily the case in Finland, that you can get an easy conversation among, and you can source easy many people from different disciplines. Yep, that's it actually. That's all. I don't know. Any questions, any comments, any, whatever, opinions? Booing is fine as well. You know. Whatever you feel like. So it's fine. I'm not gonna. I know if I waited, something would come. But let's. This is the thing which I sort of said about that. Let's do this little discussion. I'm just gonna spec it. Then we can take a little breather, and then we can start discussing. So what I want you. This is what we do a lot in Finland in general. That we want you to sort of form little groups of 2, 3, 4 people or whatever, how many you want, and you might want to sit with your close friends, or you might want to kind of venture somewhere else. It's up to you. I'm not gonna be deciding who you are gonna talk, and sort of little bit have a chat about these things. I know that many of you are sort of full of ideas and have a lot of questions. So maybe you discuss them a little bit among yourselves. And I want it not to be sort of like, oh, that's what he said there, like that, you know, interesting. But literally think about your own work, your own questions, and communicate them with the others. Think about your projects. How can maybe be possibly addressed by some? What aspects can be addressed by machine learning? What knowledge would you need? How would you obtain that? Maybe some people have some knowledge and some other people have some other knowledge and some other people have some other type of knowledge, and maybe you can even maybe find the knowledge you need to progress in your master PhD project right in this room. And I would say that it's not super likely that it's actually me or Priyankoo or in particular, you know. But it's probably somebody else in this room who actually is the most useful for you. Exactly, how to collaborate, what data you might need. Maybe somebody has, like Priyankoo always has some data sitting on his computer, you know, when we need some data. So maybe some other people around here also have some data which you might need. So let's a little bit take a breather for, what is it, 11:15. So yeah, maybe we reconvene in 5, 6, 7, 8 minutes, 7 minutes.
12.
But I want then the debate a little bit.
It's 11:45.
I know it's 11:45, so let's reconvene. Let's reconvene in like 5 to 12. And then like 15 minutes, you find these groups and 15 minutes you chat. And then I will ask you to little bit tell us what you discussed, briefly. 2 words. No, don't prepare any written report for that, you know. Just briefly. And if you say like nothing much, that's fine as well. Now, for the people who are online, this will be difficult. But we also want to have you to be involved in a discussion. So, because of course we were talking with the people who are here in person. We of course were talking even between the breaks, so they had a lot of opportunity to discuss things among themselves and with ourselves, which was sort of somewhat denied you. So in those 5-6 minutes, like Priyankoo and maybe Tukka and Abhijit, if they want, and myself, will sort of gather around the computer, and please feel free to communicate with us. Also, all these type of questions, what you might be. So this is your opportunity to voice any type of sort of concerns or questions, and yeah, we will be here fully focused on the online participants during that time, the other students.
So, anybody have the feedback form? The extra one?